Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report News Hour for Friday in the 15th year of Changi, the 11th month, and the 20th day with the Heavenly calendar. Email to setting and let's look at the five places where the king has established the Nunavut flag. And that is one, first of all, in Chilpin, Tennessee, currently 31 degrees under clear skies. And it looks like they're going to have some snow there today. It says maybe they're having it already. Anyway, clear skies right now, but supposed to have 10 hours of snow between Friday morning and Friday afternoon. I don't see anything on the radar right now. But anyway, that's what it says. Okay. 43 for a high today. Snow and rain at times with little to no accumulation. Low clouds tonight, 30 degrees for a low. And at the Tony Palace in Northeast Pennsylvania, 29 degrees under mostly cloudy skies. 36 for a high today, cloudy with intermittent wet snow this afternoon, accumulating a coating to an inch. Tonight, occasional snow accumulating an inch or two, and storm total snowfall 1 to 3 inches, and a low of 26 tonight. At the Liberty Rock RV Park and Campground in Limestone County, Texas, 42 degrees and clear right now, getting up to 59 today with plenty of sun. Tonight, clear and chilly, a low of 32. And then at the Suncheon Palace in Korea, 35 degrees and clear right now, getting down to 34 tonight. And tomorrow, partly sunny, high of 46. And then at the Gunma Palaces in Japan, 42 degrees and clear right now, getting down to 29 tonight. Tomorrow, partly sunny, high of 57. All right, let's go to Father's Word. Yes. And let's see here. In the Pan Pacific Providence. And Father is talking about the Island Nations Federation for World Peace, which Father established, I believe, in 1997, I guess. Yeah. 1997. Looks like that is 1997. Island Nations for World Peace. And Father was especially worried about the island nations in the Pacific. He often expressed concern. This is, during the 1990s that he was expressing concern about China extending its influence to the small nations in the Pacific. And indeed, that has happened. We see where China is giving support to these nations in terms of their police. Oh, we'll teach you how to do policing properly, all right? That's what they're doing. And also, of course, uh, uh, providing funds for ports. Isn't that nice of them? So as to take over the Pacific Ocean. Until now, the Pacific has basically been ruled by the United States. The United States had, ever since World War II, especially, the US has had basically control, shall we say, or not sovereignty, but basically control over the Pacific Ocean, especially with the admission of Hawaii into the United States after World War II. But now China, of course, is challenging that, particularly in the Western Pacific, also in the Southern Pacific as well. In Australia, New Zealand, I know are very concerned about that. Anyway, right here, here, Father is speaking about that, and here I have this is a paragraph. So the island nations, he says, uh, are in the position where they must take on the role that women have played in history. And you may say, what? Island nations, women? What does that have to do with one or the other? And Father says, women become married and become married and love their husbands with all their heart and with all their might, and to serve and receive love from their partner and give birth to children, and then uh, through this they 자신을 빛내고 꽃 피웁니다. Well, in this way they shine forth, I guess, shine forth and bloom as blossoms. As mothers, an important responsibility of nurturing the children. And the island nations have a similar role, in my opinion. Okay. Well, island nations, he's particularly referring, of course, to Japan. Island nation in father's mind, Japan in father's mind was sort of among island nations was sort of the chief, I guess, island nation. But he's talking about Philippines, Taiwan, and also, of course, kingdom. And really, in Father's providence after World War II, it was his intention to have the United Kingdom serve as the Eve country in God's providence. But when things didn't work out, that original 7-year course, 1945 to 1952, when things didn't work out on that, Father switched the Eve country to Japan. And it's been Japan's role in God's providence since when? Well, I guess since the beginning, I suppose, where Japan has provided personnel and funds for the worldwide providence. Sometimes Japan would send out missionaries in the thousands, or even greater numbers than that, to countries around the world, and some of them are still there, working in their mission countries. Some of them have really established themselves in their countries, and are serving their countries in ways that I cannot imagine. And they're working there silently and quietly, just trying to establish a foundation for God to reside in their countries. And this is what Father appears to be referring to there, that is the island nation's responsibility. Of course, Indonesia is another island nation, and many other island nations. And Father brought them all together in this Island Nations Federation for World Peace. And he also had, Peninsular Nations Federation for World Peace, and Continental Nations for World Peace, and so forth. And Peninsular Nations, of course, the most important one there would be Korea. And in the continental nations, the United States would be sort of central for that. The Father approached God's providence from various directions in this way. All right, then, let's see what is going on. Oh, yes. Do you know how many U.S. forces there are in Iraq? Well, if you don't, turns out you're not the one. Yesterday, the Pentagon announced, oh, guess what? Oh, you know what? We found another 1,000. How does this happen? Now that there are 900. We got 900 U.S. troops in Syria. In Syria, we've been saying there are 900. They're in Syria. And yesterday, the Pentagon announced, well, actually, we think we found another 1,000. So it's actually 2,000. This is, of course, the same Department of Defense that has failed an audit now for several years. You got to wonder what's going on. What's going on? How do you run an organization where you don't know how much money you have, or you don't know where all the money went? You don't know how many people you have and in what location. You would think. In the movies you have these big maps, right? And you have all these sort of little markers around, and then you move the markers sometimes. Apparently, that's not the way it works. Here, 900, 1,000, 900, 2,000. Yeah, Uh, but apparently, the reason that it's been kept kind of a 2000, very happy about having U.S. troops in that location. Turkey, because the United States is working with Kurdish um, Kurdish forces there, Kurdish community forces there, and Turkey basically, considers the Kurds to uh, be an undesirable group, maybe even sort of a potentially terrorist group. Um, you know, Syria, because then what will happen to our allies, the Kurds? But the tools and perhaps even for self-defense the best we can. But America really needs to draw a line. We can't be the policemen. We can't be the babysitters. Babysitter is probably the wrong word. They'll get angry with me say that. We can't, you know, be doing this for everybody in the world. They're our allies. Well, today they're our allies, just like Al Qaeda used to be our allies, right? Al Qaeda at one point was America's ally. That didn't work out very well, did it? All right. Also, before I'll go any further, I want to do a story that I've been meaning to do, and I keep forgetting, I guess, or not doing it. It's a very important story, and I thought people would get wind of this on their own, and I guess some people have, but I think a lot of people have not. And that is that the FBI and also now the what is this? What is this? CISA. What does that stand for? Uh, anyway, it's a government agency that deals with cybersecurity. I've got it here, I think. No, I don't. Okay, I thought I had it here. Okay, I guess I don't. Okay. Anyway, it's a and China recently had a major situation, major attack or cyber attack, hacking attack on U.S. communications, on phone calls and messaging, text messaging, and so forth. And so the U.S. Government, began with the FBI, but now also the CISA, is a security agency, is putting out the messaging saying, "Hey, don't use the traditional phone call or messaging apps. Don't make your phone calls. Don't use the regular messaging services because especially if you are calling from an iPhone to an Android or an Android to an iPhone, uh, there isn't any end-to-end encryption. Android to Android, I guess I'm told that there is, or iPhone to iPhone, there is end-to-end encryption, but not if you go from one to the other. So the FBI is telling people to stop using those apps and to use these other apps, such as, and for an example, they say, well, for example, Signal, and they seem to like Signal more than any others because that's the only one they ever mention by name. And this is a story that came out a couple of days ago, but one that is important. I think we need to go through it so that people understand what is going on here. So today, CISA urged senior government and political officials to switch end-to-end encrypted messaging apps to end-to-end messaging apps like Signal, following a wave of telecom breaches across dozens of countries, including 8 carriers in the United States. CISA and FBI confirmed their breaches in late October after reports that the Salt Typhoon, a Chinese-backed threat group, had hacked multiple U.S. telcos, including T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, and Lumen Technologies. Although the timing of these breaches is unclear, the attackers reportedly had access for months or longer. as tracked, also tracked as Ghost Emperor Earth, reaching telecom companies and government entities across Southeast Asia. So this Chinese hacking group has had this kind of access to phone calls and text messages going on in various countries. So they're saying, hey, let's stop giving them this information. While today's guidance applies to highly targeted individuals likely possessing information of interest to the Chinese cyber spies, the measures can help anyone concerned about the telecom hacks protect their data and information from hackers who successfully breach their mobile carrier systems. Highly targeted individuals should assume that all communications between mobile devices, including government and personal devices, and internet services are at risk of interception or manipulation, the U.S. Cybersecurity Agency said on Wednesday. CISA strongly urges highly targeted individuals to immediately review and apply the best practices provided in the guidance to protect mobile communications, including consistent use of end-to-end encryption. So in other words, use Signal, all right? So, and I think a lot of us already have Signal on our phones, and, but very few of us have actually been using it for phone calls. Some of us have been using it for text messaging. Signal nominated as secure messaging alternative. In today's advisory, CISA recommends switching to an end-to-end encrypted messaging application, naming Signal as an alternative for mobile communication across multiple mobile, in other words, iOS or Android, and desktop Mac OS, Windows, and Linux platforms. Adopt a free messaging application for secure communications that guarantees end-to-end encryption, such as Signal or similar apps. CISA recommends. So in other words, Kakao, for example, most Koreans use Kakao, and most Japanese, or a lot of Japanese, use Line, and I guess these would also qualify, in my understanding. CISA recommends an end-to-end encrypted messaging app that is compatible with both iPhone and Android operating systems, allowing for text message interoperability across platforms. Okay. All right, so then it goes into other details. So I'm going to be using Signal from now on. I'm going to stop using the regular messaging app. So if you want to get a hold of me, please use Signal. Okay. All right. Meanwhile, yes, this is more entertainment than anything else. The government shutdown may be happening tonight, and people in the media or people in politics sort of pretend or seem to act as though this is kind of the world coming to an end. But the U.S. government has been shut down a number of times before, several times before. I used to look it up, but I don't bother anymore. And you know what? The world has never ended. And these government shutdown deadlines, they always occur on what day of the week? It's not Monday, not Wednesday. It's always Friday. Always Friday. Why? So that because tomorrow, Saturday, people aren't coming to work anyway. At least most people. And then on Sunday, and then so they basically have another 2 days before people actually have to start not coming to work. And sometimes that happens. It even goes into the following week. But you know what? Eventually, they work it out, and the government employees who didn't come to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or so forth, they always get their pay. It's not as if they're missing out on their paychecks for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so forth when they didn't come to work. They always get it. They always get it. They always put in a provision that says that, okay, well, people get their back pay. The people who do are the military people who, in some cases, I don't know if that's the case this time, probably not this time, but in some cases, they have had to wait for their paychecks. And that, at one time I worked for a man who one month did not send me my paycheck. And you know what I did? I quit. I ain't going to work for anybody who's not going to pay me. Unless it's the church. Okay, that's another thing. But if it's not, if I'm not getting paid spiritually, all right, he's got to pay me in money. And if that check doesn't come, I'm gone. Anyway, so yeah, military people, they don't have that luxury of being able to quit like that. I don't think that's the case this time because it's the 20th. Yeah. But it is, just before Christmas, and so, and that's another way that they sort of put pressure. The congressmen put pressure on themselves or the other party by scheduling these kinds of things just before Christmas or other sort of very inconvenient time. And if you've been following it, I know you know what's going on, and if you're not following it, then don't bother. But it's very possible that the U.S. government will get shut down tonight, and we'll see what happens. But one thing that is interesting about this is that President Trump and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy tried to flex their muscles and tried to get something that they wanted, and they failed. At least yesterday, they failed. It's still in process. 38 Republicans yesterday voted against the plan that President Trump supported. Two Democrats, two Democrats voted in favor of it, but all the rest of the other Democrats, of course, voted against. And President Trump had threatened, "Hey, anybody who doesn't support me, we're going to primary you. We're going to go after you in the next primary." Well, sometimes that works. But for example, one of the leaders of this rebellion, shall we say, is a guy named Rob Roy, who is a congressman from Texas. And I looked up his situation, and earlier this year, during the Texas primary, he ran in the Republican primary unopposed, so he got 100% of the vote. And then in the general election against the Democrat, he got 61.9% of the vote, makes 62. So he's in a very comfortable position. And so that kind of threat from Trump and Musk and Ramos probably not going to really affect him so much. Yeah, you want to primary me? Go ahead. I've got a lock. I got a lock on my seat, so you're not going to be able to do anything to me. I guess that's sort of his attitude. So yeah, President Trump, author of The Art of the Deal, but politics is a bit different. And Musk especially, I think, is kind of a learning stage about how things work in politics. Anyway, we'll see how they get through this situation, and I'm sure it'll all work out. Probably during the weekend, it'll all work out, right? All right, let's see here. Um, Also, let's see now. Pentagon warns that China has tripled its nuclear arsenal. Well, that's not good news. But China was pretty far behind both the United States and Russia in terms of its nuclear arsenal. So I think they're playing catch up. Of course, we don't want them to catch up, but the Pentagon's annual military and security developments involving the People's Republic of China report, released on Wednesday, found that China is making progress toward its goal of military modernization despite persistent corruption problems. The report warned China has almost tripled its nuclear arsenal since 2020. That's just 4 years. That's pretty amazing. According to the Pentagon, China now has over 600 operational nuclear warheads. That's still quite a bit less than the US, right? The official US estimate in 2020 was in the low 200s. China's nuclear arsenal remains far smaller than those of the United States and Russia, which have over 5,500 warheads each. The Federation of Scientists 5,580 warheads for Russia and 5,044 for the US in 2024. Together, the two nuclear superpowers control about 88% of the world's nuclear weapons. China is now in third place, and the Pentagon's latest estimate for China was at least 100 warheads higher than what the FAS came up with. The Pentagon report credited the People's Republic of China with rapidly modernizing its non-nuclear forces, in addition to managing the fastest nuclear buildup since the Cold War. The PRC seeks to achieve what Xi Jinping has referred to as the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation by 2049, and to revise the international order in support of the PRC system of governments and its national interests, senior U.S. defense official told reporters as the annual China report was rolled out. When you look at what they're trying to build here, it's a diversified nuclear force that would be comprised of systems ranging from low-yield precision strike missiles all the way up to ICBMs, with different options at basically every rung of the escalation ladder, which is a lot different than what they've relied on traditionally, the official said. Right. So China still trying to become one of the big boys in world politics. And with Russia, declining, I would say, as a result of the Ukraine war, and both NATO and Russia are both declining right now as a result of that war, which is what happens when you have a fight. Both sides are declining, and that's what happens in fights. So China now feels that it is in the ascendant, and it has only the United States to worry about. I think they feel. Putin gave an interview, sort of a year-end interview in Moscow, where he said, "Oh, the Ukraine war has made Russia stronger. Yes, it's made stronger." Well, that's the kind of bravado that you would expect. Of course, it's propaganda, but it's bravado and it's propaganda that is common in governments, but especially in authoritarian governments, and especially in an authoritarian government that is in a war that is actually weakening it. But we'll see. We'll see. NATO and I think the globalists want the Ukraine war to continue because they see it as weakening Russia more and more. We'll see what President Trump is able to do between now and inauguration, and if it's still going on at the time of his inauguration, and what will happen after that inauguration. Zelensky seems to be more and more amenable towards peace talks. It didn't used to be that way. He would say, "Oh no, we're gonna recover every inch of territory," but he's not saying that anymore. We'll see what happens. See what happens. We just hope that conflict does not expand beyond where it already is. The North Korean troops being there, of course, NATO has tried to portray this as a tremendous escalation of the war, and how this is kind of a world war. But wait a second, in the Korean War, there were 16 countries that sent troops to the Korean War, but we don't call that a world war, right? And not just these 16 nations that sent troops, but also others sent sort of medical personnel and all sorts of support personnel as well. So I think there were actually more than 40 countries that were directly or indirectly involved in the Korean War, supporting South Korea in one way or another. But we don't call that a world war. So I don't think that the addition of North Korean troops to the Ukraine war can be seen as necessarily sort of expanding this war to a worldwide level. But anyway, let's pray for its quick conclusion. As President Trump has said, we got to stop the dying. People are dying. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying. And we don't want that. No, we don't want that. Is territory that important? I suppose in some sense it may be, but is it worth the lives of hundreds and thousands of people? Anyway, maybe if it were my country, I might feel differently. Let's pray that President Trump can do it, because obviously Biden's not going to be able to do anything. He's not going to be able to do anything. In fact, let's see now. The NATO is now sending more of funds, tens of billions of dollars of funds to Ukraine now. And I guess everybody wants to get their everybody wants money before President Trump comes on board. Okay, it was a Newsmax article. Let me see if I can get it here. That it's not the NATO, it's EU that is sending in all this money. Hold on just a second. There we go. EU plans massive Ukraine aid for 2025. The European Union will deliver an additional $36.20 billion of financial support to Ukraine in 2025. EU's Council President Antonio Costa said in a meeting with EU leaders in Brussels. As the aggressed country can legitimately define what peace means, and if and when the conditions are met for credible negotiations, Costa said. So that's kind of the official position of the NATO and supporters of Ukraine. But remember that that all depends. For example, in the Korean War, South Korea did not define what peace meant. Finally, when the armistice was signed in July 1953, South Korea actually was president at that time, and he said, "No, we're going to keep fighting until we unite the peninsula." But the United States said, "Hey, no, we're tired of this war. It doesn't have any public support in the United States, and so we're going to end it right here." And so President Eisenhower, basically 6 months after he came into office, ended the war along with China and North Korea. So now is not the time to speculate about different scenarios. Now is the time to strengthen Ukraine for all scenarios. Leaders emphasized the need to intensify the transfer of air defense and missiles to Ukraine. So it sounds like the globalists, including the EU, want this war to continue because they see it as weakening Russia. To help Ukraine to defend itself effectively against Russia and Russia's aggression, the European Council calls for the urgent stepping up of efforts, and particularly on the delivery of air defense systems, ammunition, and missiles, as well as on the provision of necessary training and equipment for Ukrainian brigades, according to a statement released by the European Ukraine. The president of the European Commission said the EU has already provided Ukraine with nearly $135 billion in aid. We have ensured both economic and financial stability until 2025. This is good news. With the fund for Ukraine and the G7 loan, we cover Ukraine's budget deficit for 2025. Some countries have to borrow or print money, but not Ukraine. Yeah, the EU covers the Ukraine's budget deficit. Isn't that nice? This will allow Ukraine to have more financial resources to purchase weapons. European Commission from who? Right, from weapons makers. So who's making all the money for it? Yeah, the military-industrial complex, right? European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said in Brussels. In his plea for more aid, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky told the summit that Russian President Vladimir Putin lives in his own bubble for proffering his vision for an agreement to end the war. He simply suggested that Ukraine surrender, freeze the conflict, change the direction of progress neither toward Europe nor NATO, but toward the Russian Federation, so that they would rule over our state, deprive us of independence. And this person calls this some kind of agreement. He's just an old pipe dreamer. We really, he lives in a different world, in his own bubble, Zelensky said. Yes. Well, if this goes on, though, Russia is going to, at some point, and put in their own sort of puppet regime in Kiev. So it's interesting that Zelensky feels that he can rely on continued aid from the EU, but his days of relying on continued aid from the United States, though, may be coming to an end in about 35 days. I think it was 31 days. I'm sorry, 31 days. About 31 days and change. So we'll see. We'll see. New guy's going to come in charge. Going to be in charge in Washington, and I think especially when that happens, then there'll be a huge amount of pressure on Zelensky to accept some of the realities on the ground and to let this war come to an end. And I expect Russia will also want it to come to an end, despite what Putin said in his news conference. I don't think he actually lives in the kind of bubble that Zelensky says. I think he probably realizes that and it needs for this thing to stop. In the beginning, I'm sure Russia expected, and I expected, and I think almost everyone except for the people in Ukraine expected that Russia was going to wipe out, go right through Ukraine and sort of take over that country in just a matter of weeks. But now, coming close to 3 years, and please, 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 we do not want another 20-year war. All right, we do not want another 20-year war. But you know why this can happen? Because governments can continue to create money. And that's what enables a country to, for example, like the United States fighting in Afghanistan for 20 years. If the government did not have the ability to create money, however much money it wanted, such a 20-year war would not be possible. Or even this, 100 and what billion? 100 and how much billion? 135 billion is already provided from the EU. 135 billion in aid. Where did that 135 billion come from? From taxes? From borrowing? It doesn't say, but governments don't like to raise taxes. Kind of, it's unpopular. You can lose elections that way. You don't want to do that. So what do? What do? They borrow. Okay, they borrow, but they issue these pieces of paper, so IOUs, and then they sell those. But then the banks buy them, but then they turn them over to the central bank, and the central bank gives the banks money for that. Where does the central bank get the money from? Well, they create it out of nothing. So I suspect that a lot of this 135 billion was eventually just created out of nothing. And if you want to stop wars, especially if you want to stop long wars that go on for years and decades, you got to take the power to create money out of nothing away from the government and from the central bank. In World War II, how did they fund World War II? Right? Excuse me. The government issued war bonds. Excuse me. The government issued war bonds. And if you go back and look, they were selling war bonds. They were encouraging people to buy war bonds. And Hollywood entertainers, celebrities would go around having events where they would encourage people to buy war bonds, and there were, there was advertising campaign to buy war bonds, and this was sort of patriotic duty of everybody to buy war bonds, and that's different from creating new money, because the money that goes into war bonds is already money that already exists. It exists in people's pocket, and they buy the war bonds and they keep them, and then hopefully at the end of the term of those war bonds, and they get their principal back together with interest from the government. So that's money that's already in existence going from one place to another. So you're not increasing the money supply. You're not creating new money. But in Korean War, there were no war bonds being sold then. Why? Because it was not a popular war. And Vietnam War, certainly no war bonds then. Because Vietnam War was not a popular war. In fact, it was so unpopular that President Johnson, who was president for most of the time that the Vietnam War was going on, President Johnson finally had to give up on the idea of being reelected in 1968 because the Vietnam War was so unpopular. That was the major reason that he decided not to run for election again. So instead of selling war bonds, they sell bonds that eventually the central bank, the Federal Reserve, buys for money that the Federal Reserve has created out of nothing. So they're not going to tax people for the war. They're not going to sell war bonds for the war. So they just make money out of nothing for the war. And we need to take that power away from government. We need to take that power away from government, make it so that so the central bank cannot create new money. And it used to be that way with when gold was the standard, right? You only create as much money as you had gold. That was it. And so that was kind of a ceiling. No more. Well, 1930s came around and FDR said, you know what? We don't have enough gold. Who's got the gold? Oh, the people have the gold. Okay, well, then you know what we're going to do? We're going to confiscate, or they didn't actually confiscate, but we're going to require everybody to sell their gold to the government for $24 an ounce. That's what they did. Okay, and it became illegal in 1933, I think, 30 or 33, I believe, became illegal for Americans to own gold. Do you realize that? It was illegal for Americans to own gold. Why? Because the government needed to create money, and it didn't have enough gold to create as much money as they wanted. And so, having purchased the gold from American citizens at $24 an ounce, a little while later, the government said, okay, we're going to change that. It's no longer $24 an ounce, it's now $32 an ounce. Voila! That gives us basically they devalued the dollar, but basically they allowed themselves then to create that much more currency, that much more money there, that much more currency. Why? Because FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, wanted to institute all these socialist programs that he said was going to get America through the Great Depression. And then but still, even after that, countries could still, if they had a with the United States, they could take their dollars that they received from the United States and get gold for them, even after 1933. But then in 1973, 71, I'm sorry, 71, I think it was 71, President Nixon said, you know what? This isn't working. We still don't have enough gold to print as much money as we would like. So, no more gold. We're not going to use gold as a standard anymore. We're just going to print as much money as we want. Right? And you guys deal with it. And so then the gold window was closed temporarily, more than 50 years ago, but it's still temporarily. Since then, the United States government and basically all governments that are able to print their own currency, not all governments print their own currency, all governments that print their own currency have been able to create as much money as they want, to spend it on whatever they want, and in many times that turns out to be wars. And Afghanistan was that way, and 135 billion from the EU for Ukraine. I have a feeling that a pretty big chunk of that 135 billion must be that kind of money that was created for nothing. All right, so we need to take that power away. So how do you do that? How do you do that? You have to have a money that whose limit is defined and cannot be changed. The world's gold doesn't change very much. It changes by about 1 or 2% a year, the increase in the gold supply. But recently, China announced that it found the huge gold deposit. Wow, yeah, we found all this gold lying in our territory. Isn't that nice? So gold, the supply of gold is actually increasing. But and so some people say that we should go back to the gold standard because the supply of gold is pretty well defined. It increases, just a couple of percentage points a year. But of course, gold is what got us into this trouble in the first place because of it. Because it is so difficult to transport. Um, anyway, we'll figure it out. I'm sure. I'm sure we will figure it out at some point or another. But this ability for governments to create money that is causing all kinds of difficulty. So a lot of people say, if you want to change the world, you got to change the money because the money, basically the way that the money operates is the source of many of the world's problems, many of the world's problems. We'll figure it out, I'm sure, at some point or other. Hopefully, we'll figure it out sooner rather than later. Okay. But the money, that's something that we really need to think about and how to, with the China Group. The Constitution says that the Congress has the authority to coin money, and that's the case with the current United States of America Constitution as well. The Congress has the authority to coin money. Unfortunately, the Congress has given that authority to the Federal Reserve instead of exercising it themselves. And it's another one of those powers that basically much legislative authority has been abdicated to the executive branch, and even the authority to coin money, to create money, has been abdicated to the Federal Reserve, the central bank. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to be corrected in the current American system, and we'll see how much President Trump was able to do through Musk and Ramaswamy and others. We'll have to see what happens with all of that. Let's see. Let's go to Epoch Times for see what's going on there. Never been to the Epoch Times in a while. Okay. Senate Republicans create Make America Healthy Again caucus as RFK Jr. continues the Capitol Hill tour. It's going to be interesting. Going to be very interesting having RFK Jr. In charge of the health department. He has some strong views. He's of course a Democrat who became Republican during the campaign, and I think many Democrats are kind of regretting that they allowed him to escape the reservation. They feel that it would have been a good idea to run him instead of Biden or Harris. And he would have stood a much better chance against President Trump. But anyway, he's our guy now, so deal with it. Okay. Let's see here. U.S. State Department officials meet Syria's new rulers in Damascus. Local governments in China face huge problems. Yes, that is true. This is something that's been going on for a while. Let's see what the Epoch Times is saying about it today. And they've been coming up with various ways to get money, one of which is to kidnap CEOs of companies and hold them for ransom. Yes. Can you imagine the government doing that? Adding to China's increasingly intense economic and financial problems is how local governments face insolvency and a dangerous public backlash. Right. Oh, China, on the one hand, is expanding its nuclear capabilities. It's threatening to invade Taiwan, and it's threatening to absorb South Korea sometimes through election fraud. And election fraud in South Korea apparently involves China. Um, but there's also this thing going on. Its economy could be, it's in definite trouble, but it could be, well, do we dare use the word collapse? But who knows? These things happen gradually and then quickly and suddenly. If China did not have big economic troubles, the plight of its local government has added to them. Like much else in China, the exuberance accompanying the years of rapid growth created today's problems. In the earlier good times, land sales for explosive property development fueled a flood of revenues for the local governments. Well, land sales is a bit of a misnomer, isn't it? Because land is not sold in China. The government owns all the land, and land is actually leased to uh, individuals or to companies, enterprises, where they can lease it for 50, 75, sometimes 100 years, at least on paper, and then they can build on that land. So land is not sold as it is in the capitalist countries. Fueled a flood of revenues for local governments, and it's these lease payments, the revenue for local governments. And this flood inspired a debt-dependent spending boom, often on projects of dubious economic aspect. Now, amid a property crisis and significantly slower overall growth, land sales, there I go again with the sales, and revenue flows have ebbed, leaving local governments unable to meet their financial obligations and in some cases unable even to provide basic public services. The ensuing cutbacks have presented a dangerous prospect of social unrest, but at the very least, yet another hurdle in the way of Beijing's efforts to restore the economy's former momentum. So even the position of Xi Jinping sometimes is said to be a bit shaky, and we'll see what that eventually leads to. Whether he will try to in Taiwan as a way of uniting the country around him, we'll have to see. The fiscal financial situation facing local governments can only be described as dire. The debt they built up in the good is hard to measure because much of it is connected to complex arrangements that take it off government balance sheets. That's right. So sometimes they will transfer debt to government-owned banks, for example, or government-owned enterprises. So it doesn't really show up on the government balance sheet, but it's still a debt there that has to be repaid. It is, however, estimated at a minimum of the dollar equivalent of $2 trillion. Well, that's, well, 2 trillion. No, we wish in America, we wish we only had $2 trillion in debt. We have 36 trillion now, with some estimates ranging as high as 7 to 11 trillion dollars. As much as $800 billion is estimated to be at risk of default, according to analyses conducted by Victor Shi, professor of political science at the University of California, San Diego. Debt servicing obligations alone amount in some cases to 125% of local government revenues. Faced with this intense financial squeeze, many governments have had to cut back on public services. Wuhan, Dalian, and Guangzhou have made cuts in medical benefits and other healthcare services. Other localities have delayed paying the wages of civil servants and the fees owed to contractors for things such as road maintenance and cleaning. Not surprisingly, public protests have erupted in the city of Shanwei in late October. Doctors and nurses interrupted their workday to gather in the hospital's public space and complain about a loss of pay and bonuses. Elsewhere, retirees have protested delays in their pension payments. So far in 2024, China has seen some 1,200 such protests about unpaid wages or other forms of compensation. There were some 1,600 such protests in 2023. Both figures are way up from the slightly more than 700 such protests averaged each year in 2021 and 2022. A few weeks ago, Beijing stepped in to mitigate these pressures. As readers of this column know, the national authorities put forth a program to swap the equivalent of $1.4 trillion new bonds underwritten by Beijing for some of this local government debt. The new bonds cannot lessen the ultimate financial burden on these local governments. Still, they marginally reduce the interest on the debt by extending maturities, postpone the immediate burden of repayment. So, of course, the message that China's local governments are, and of course, Beijing, the central government is able to create its money, and that's what they've been doing, by the way. Money that they use uh, try and sort of pump prime the economy, which is what they're doing right now, lowering interest rates as well, and seeing what they can do. And uh, really, trouble. Well, it's the second largest economy now in terms of its nominal size. So if China somehow goes into a huge deep recession or depression, then that's going to affect the United States and it's going to affect Europe and the world. So we'll see. That may be something that will happen in 2025, and the world economy will be suffering as a result. But President Trump really needs to bring down. President Reagan brought down Soviet Communist Party. The same with the Chinese Communist Party. Let's pray for. Let's pray for. Communism is the enemy of God, as the king has often stated. A father said that communism is satanic globalism. Satanic globalism. And it needs to be wiped away from the earth. That would be the most important thing that even bringing peace to Ukraine, bringing peace to Gaza and Syria and any place else, getting rid of the Chinese Communist Party. That would be a tremendous, tremendous contribution to world history. It would really put him into the history books if he can do that. All right, let's see. We have a couple of minutes left. Let's see what else is going on here. U.S. should abolish the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling is another one of those sort of games that people play in Washington, isn't it? Um, it's supposed to limit the amount of money that the American government is able to borrow, but of course they keep they keep raising it. So it really has very little meaning, if at all. It's used as a political tool every time it comes up for renewal. And let's see here. Border Patrol Union endorses Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence. And federal government sets new climate goals for the U.S. Oh, wow. Okay. And Putin ready for compromises over Ukraine and talks with Trump. Okay, yeah. So he wants the war to end. I'm sure he does. On his terms, yeah. Let's see here. State Department officials meet Syria's new rulers in Damascus. And Turkey right now wants the terrorist organization category to be removed from that the HTS group that is in charge now in Damascus. Turkey. Turkey suddenly has become a major, major force in the Middle East. And the Georgia Appeals Court disqualifies Femi Willis from Trump election case. Uh, you know, you can see this coming. And the New York case is still on, but that case too, I think the days are numbered. Hey, Trump won, all right. Deal with it. And Sebastian Gorka is talking about how the Trump administration will tackle terrorism and national security threats. Okay. Russia strikes multiple sites in Ukraine as a response to long-range missile attacks. So missiles are still flying back and forth. Right. An aide to California politician arrested, charged with conspiring with a Chinese spy to infiltrate U.S. politics. Not surprising. Not surprising. Mm. All right, that's about it for today. Texas governor announces ad campaign in Mexico and Central America. the deterring illegal immigration. Well, okay. All right, that's about it for today. Appreciate your being with us this morning. And tomorrow, Saturday, Richard will be here with his presentation. And I'll be back on Monday. We're gearing up for a new kind of a new thing that will start in January. New sort of a King's Report and a MAGA report type of thing that Richard is going to do. Anyway, we'll be giving more details about that as we go on. So, hey, God bless Godspeed. May His kingdom come quickly.